Welcome to the COPreneur Path Podcast.
Welcome to the show that is all about the path from cop to COPreneur. I'm your host, Adam Wills. With this podcast, I'm going to help equip you for your own post-law enforcement entrepreneurial journey with lessons learned from my experience growing a successful post-Leo business. You'll also get to hear from fellow COPreneurs and experts in business and marketing whose advice will give you an edge against the competition. You are in the right place, so let's get after it. Welcome back to another episode of the COPreneur Path Podcast by eliotaceo.com. I am here today with Paul Lewis. Paul is the owner of FHF Gear, based out of Montana. And hey, Paul, it's good to have you on, and welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. I appreciate you reaching out.
Yeah, it's actually kind of interesting how I learned about you, I guess, and got connected. A client of mine who happens to be, she's a therapist that works with combat veterans.
Okay.
She came across, I guess her husband is into your guys' products, and she was looking at the website. My guess is I hope I'm not dropping any secrets here, but my guess is for like a Christmas present or something
Gotcha.
for her husband, and was looking at your about page and saw your story that you are former law enforcement. And so she reached out to me. She said, "Hey, you should reach out to this guy and make a connection. It'd be a good podcast interview." So
yeah,
I have to admit, I have never bought any of your gear, but looking at your website at FHFgear.com, I would love to take a look at some things and buy some stuff. You'll probably take a lot of my money.
Well, we do our best.
Well, why don't you let everybody know? So what is FHF Gear? What do you guys sell?
So FHF, I started out doing custom gear, and it was fishing, hunting, and tactical gear. And really early on, it was more of a hobby, and kind of came up with the name Fish Hunt Fight because I thought fish hunt tactical sounded a little weird. So being in Bozeman, Montana, which is where we're at, the hunting side really took off, and fishing as well. But hunting is kind of the bulk of our business at this point. But we try and build everything kind of with the tactical roots in mind. So, hunting gear that has the construction and durability of tactical gear. So really just all sorts of outdoor gear.
So how did this business start? Was it just because of your own passion for fishing and hunting, and obviously your prowess in all things tactical?
It's kind of a weird story, and makes me a little bit uncomfortable when I talk about, business with folks, just because I have zero business experience, had no real interest in business until, this kind of kicked off, and I realized it was, had the potential to be successful. To be honest, I was too cheap to buy a piece of tactical gear that I wanted to make, and I was doing internet searches for, how to make one, and came across, websites and instructions and materials. And so I started putting stuff together, which led to teammates wanting me to make stuff for them, which led to hunting buddies wanting me to make stuff for them. And, I was charging enough just to buy materials because it was kind of a hobby more than anything. And quite honestly, I look back at some of the first stuff I made and can't believe that people actually paid for it. But now, it really kind of word of mouth took off and really became, we had some products that really became pretty popular, and it's been a struggle to keep up for years. And, just one thing led to another. And, early on, I didn't even do any promotion. It was more of I was afraid to get more business because I was still working full time. I was, in charge of our investigations division. I was a SWAT team leader. It wasn't like I had a whole lot of extra time. And so really I was, I thought, I'll build this business out after I retire. But it got to the point where before I retired, I really had to sit down and pencil out whether or not I should finish the 20-year career or, take the dive.
The big decision.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. I love hearing the genesis or the origin story of a lot of these business ideas, because so many of them, like yours, were were not necessarily intentional. It was something that started off as something you were trying to do for yourself or a hobby, and then just grows into a business. And that's really cool. I love those kinds of stories. It's pretty neat.
Yeah. It's been a ride for sure. But
So
without
how
having
long ago was that?
that was, 2009, late
Okay.
2008, 2009. And like I said, it was more of custom stuff where I'd taken orders through one website that I was a member of in one of the online forums. And, I did some stuff on eBay and just kind of word of mouth stuff. And so I purposely tried to grow very slow or not grow at all. And really by 2000, it wasn't long after that. It grew much faster than I expected, and really kind of took off on me. And I retired from the sheriff's office. My 20 years was 2018, so I've been doing it full time since then.
So how many years then? So you were uh, like 5 or 6 years you were running that business while you were still in law enforcement. Is that right?
Yeah, almost. Yeah, like nine almost.
Okay.
2009 to
I'm bad at
2000.
math
Yeah,
in
so
my
am I.
head.
So am I. Not my strong suit. But yeah, it was. Yeah, I did it for a while. And it was super interesting trying to manage the time, with having the full-time job, training, family, all of that stuff on top of
Yeah.
this becoming a full-time job.
So tell me, how did you make that decision to go all in with your business? Because that's a decision a lot of our audience is currently struggling with as they're trying to decide, I've got this idea and, I want to pursue it, but, is there a point where should I start it now or should I, just go all in or, give it some time? Right. So I think it's a tough decision, and every situation is different and unique, right? So it's not like there's a one size fits all answer here, but hearing examples from people like you of how you actually went about making that decision is certainly helpful. So can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, it was interesting. And, once we started doing some very minor ads, I was building my own Facebook ads and, Google AdWords, different things like that, and actually paying money to promote the products. And once I got away from doing custom work, where I actually heard you mention one of your previous podcasts about, the services aren't going to make you money, and I was sitting there behind a sewing machine all the time. I was not paying for my time.
Yeah.
But once I had somebody else sewing for me and starting to actually promote the products that I had in inventory, I started to make some money. And I really had to, probably 3 to 5 years from retirement age. And I really had to sit down and kind of pencil it out and say, I was able to retire at 42. If I were to leave then, I wouldn't be able to draw any of my retirement until I was 52. So I was looking at 10 years of not having any guaranteed income, and still at a point where I wasn't sure this was going to be able to be my full-time job. So, I had the health benefits and all that stuff, and I, did the math and, worked out leaving even 3 years early. I was looking at losing, over $1 million just in retirement income, health insurance, that kind of stuff. And have always struggled with the fact that, people actually seem to like the gear. Listening to your podcast on that imposter syndrome really kind of struck with me in that, like, I don't know if I really belong here.
Yeah.
But, so I was a bit risk adverse to just leave. And I ended up figuring, if I could work my 20 years, get that retirement income immediately, and then dive all in. And then I was at a point, where I knew I could leave, have income, and work got to a point where I just felt like it was not as fun as it used to be. You start dreading the same call you've had for the last 20 years and the same family and arresting the same
Yep.
grandkids of the, parents you've arrested many times. And, it just got to a point where I was like, it was time to go. And I had the benefit of having this business in the same community I policed in. And I worked 6 years straight a night shift. And as we all know, that you don't deal with the cream of the crop working 2 a.m. shifts. You're
That was my
dealing with.
favorite shift, though.
It was mine too. I loved it. But you begin to, and the one thing I'd say to the other cops out there, you begin to put a shell around yourself, and it's you and your coworkers, and you don't have outside friends, and you believe
Yep.
the entire community is full of meth heads and tweakers, and that's what you think. Having this business actually helped open my eyes to dealing with people inside the community. And I maintain that the hunting and fishing community, you have kind of a pretty good group of people to deal with, and I realized not everybody out here is bad.
Yeah.
And it helped my mental status, I think, when I started realizing that I could go out and meet people, and not everybody hated cops, and it wasn't a reason for me to look at everybody with a completely suspicious eye.
Yeah, it's amazing how that mindset just completely shifts when you actually leave. That was kind of something I went through too, especially the last couple of years that I was on. I worked a 2-year case doing some undercover work with a narcotics ring.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're right. You start thinking man, everybody's on the take.
Yep.
There's not a single good person in this community. Right. And it's kind of interesting is actually recently I hired a guy that used to work for me. He was a sergeant of mine, and
Yep.
he was in 2 OISs in 2020, and decided to leave, and I hired him on. And he just said to me a couple of weeks ago, he's like, "This is great." He's like, "I was starting to wonder if there was even a job out there that existed in the world where I didn't have to deal with tweakers." And
Yep.
here we are.
Yep.
So
Well, don't get me wrong. I still sit with my back to the wall when I go out, and I still have those instincts, but I definitely it's definitely been nice to be able to kind of shift your mindset a little bit and realize that it's not you against everyone else.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's interesting to me too that you mentioned the podcast episode on overcoming comparison and imposter syndrome, because I feel like the last 2 people that I've had on the show have mentioned that episode as well. So I had no idea how impactful that was going to be when I decided to record that. And part of the reason I decided to record that, I mean, obviously I needed to record an episode, but that was kind of just on my mind that day. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to lay it out. I'm just going to lay it out there. I'm going to get on and I'm just going to record and talk about my own struggle with comparison and imposter syndrome. And it's interesting how impactful that's been to people. And anybody that's listening that hasn't listened to that episode yet, it's episode number 55. So if you go back, you can look for episode 55. You can even go to the podcast website, just go to CPP for COPreneur Path, cpp.fm. And then in the search bar, just type in the number 55 and it'll come up. So yeah, thanks for mentioning that. I appreciate that feedback.
It definitely struck me for sure. It's been one of those things I struggle with in, not having a business background, not having a sewing background, not having a design background. And now I'm designing things that I sew in a relatively successful business. And, I go to these meetings and design meetings with other collaborators. And for the longest time, I really struggled with man, what if they realize I don't know what I'm doing? But my wife continually reminds me that obviously something, because people are approaching you and coming to you, and the products you make are selling. So it's humbling.
Yeah, there's a saying, and I'm paraphrasing here, and I don't even know who this quote can be attributed to, but it's behind every successful man is a good woman, right? And
true.
Man is that true? It's so true, especially in business.
Yeah, definitely true in my case.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, when we had connected earlier, you had kind of mentioned that there was maybe an aspect of your business that you really felt like was just part of being in the right place at the right time.
Hmm.
What exactly can you tell us about that?
I think, mostly what I meant by that was, I starting this business and like you said before, I was avid hunter, avid fisherman, living in Bozeman, Montana, which is kind of the mecca of the hunting industry right now. Um, I started making things before most of these other competitors were really out there building similar items, and I was able to get kind of the who's who of the hunting personalities, I guess, so to speak, using our stuff. I was making custom gear for them, and which got the name out really early and really loudly. So,
Yeah.
right place and right time in that case, and it just, which is again why we've kind of focused on the hunting side of the business.
Well, while we're on the topic of Bozeman, Montana, we'll give a quick little shout out to my podcast manager, James Healy, because he lives in Bozeman as well.
Oh,
So,
nice.
or at least in that area. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So, shout out to James, who will hear this first while he's editing it. So, yeah, James is awesome. He's the wizard behind the scenes.
Come say hi,
So,
James.
yeah. So, like 13 years in business now, right? If
Yep.
I'm doing my math correctly, certainly along the way, there have been some good lessons learned and some hard lessons learned. What can you share with the audience that might help them in their journey from cop to COPreneur?
I'd say early on, well, I tried to put this together on a shoestring budget. I rolled my first $300 into this business that I did my first tiny little production run. If you're a cop and a cop now, you have an income. So everything I did, every penny I made, I rolled back into the business and was able to kind of grow it that way. I didn't go into significant debt. There's times as I did some expansion where I took out lines of credit, went in with a simple plan, as even as simple as on a piece of notebook paper to the banker and said, here's what I'm have need this money for, and here's what I'm going to use it for, and here's how I plan on getting it back. And I was able to pay those lines of credit back, within the first 3 months or something. But really, just kind of rolling that money in and not. I've seen it done where people, they start making a little money and they just go out and buy a truck, or they go buy their
Yeah,
toys, and they aren't putting it back into the business to help grow it. I luckily didn't have that problem, but that was one of those things that I think really helped me early on. Um, then I'd
that is
say,
sage advice, my man.
well, yeah, it's one of those things that I think definitely helped me early on. And then as I was able to grow, I was really struggling with, I was doing my own website design, my own marketing, my own SEO, my own, I'm Googling, trying to learn, all while trying to sew and keep up and learn more sewing techniques and design techniques and fabrics. And, I have no business background. I have a biology degree and I was a cop for 20 years. So it's not like either of those things really lend themselves to business skills. Once I was at a point where I was able to hire people who knew what they were doing for those things that really I was doing the business a disservice. Hiring a marketing agency, hiring a website designer, hiring an
Yeah,
ad buyer for you know marketing in that respect. All those things were just huge lifts off my plate. That and hiring an accountant, I was doing my own QuickBooks, and just those kinds of things. As you can do that, it frees up your time to actually do what makes you money versus really being stuck in that quagmire of not doing any of the things well, or not giving the attention you need to actually put back into the business.
yeah. But you have to learn those things, right? I mean, um, that period of time, like there's this awkward period. And tell me if you agree with this. This is what I feel like from my experience and having gone through this. There's this really awkward period where like you become very successful as a solopreneur. And
Mm-hmm.
you're like, okay, I could stay right here in this spot that I'm in by myself and be just fine, right? And be
Yep.
okay. But then there's that like demand and you feel like you have to meet it. And so you want to grow, but there's this in between period there before you get to a point where you've scaled and feel like you are generating enough income to actually cover everything, where there's kind of a step out in faith and confidence in yourself to just say, all right, I'm going to invest the money in growing my business. And I don't know how this is going to work. And it's scary, but it's this really awkward and uncomfortable in between time.
100% agree. It's one of those things. You learn those things. I have a grasp on all those things now.
Yeah.
I listen to a lot of podcasts, do a lot of internet research, learn everything I can. But at the end of the day, now, as I've scaled, some of the scariest things I've done and be like, you want how much, how to write a Facebook ad? I can do that.
Yeah.
And then, the first time you get a return on your ad spend and realize, oh, yeah, they actually know what they're doing. And,
Yep.
or you're able to put the money down for advertising, for example. I was putting $100 a month. To me was like, oh, that seems like I'm throwing money away, and now I don't even know what my wife has the budget, but it's significantly more than that. And
Yeah, you can't really be effective with Facebook ads unless you're spending at least $3,000 a month.
yeah, and all of a sudden, you look at the return and man, it's scary. But if you have the inventory to support it, obviously you don't want to do that if you're, going to sell out in the first 10 minutes. But, it definitely agree with you. There's that weird transitional phase where you kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, and, what you keep yourself and what you can kind of delegate.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an awkward time. And like you said, you wouldn't want to make that sort of a push if you didn't have the inventory to support it, because you'd go flop, right? You'd be like,
Right.
oh my gosh, there's too much demand. I would also similarly say, for anybody that's got a service-based business, the goal before you can reach that point of really scaling, you have to productize your service and your offering, because again, like you reach this barrier to growth. Like you can go run ads, but if you can't actually help every single person that ends up opting into that and coming through the door, well, you're in trouble, right? And so productizing your service based offering is absolutely essential to growth and scale.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like I said, I didn't feel like I started making money until I outsourced some sewing and actually had inventory on hand versus making every piece myself.
Interesting how that happens, isn't
Hmm.
it? Well, Paul, it's been awesome having you on. I want to encourage everybody to support you and your business, Paul, because that's what we do. We're fellow copreneurs who want to support each other, and who doesn't love awesome fishing, hunting, and fighting gear. So anybody that's listening, I want you to head over to FHFgear.com. Paul has been generous enough to put together a coupon code just for our listeners here. So if you're listening to the show, you can just plug in the coupon code LEO2CEO. So that's the number 2, LEO2CEO, when you check out, and you'll get 15% off of your order. So, Paul, thank you for that. Would you mind maybe leaving us with a closing thought and letting everybody know how they can connect with you if they want to connect?
Yeah, closing thought. Good question. The
Under fire.
I know he caught me off
Yeah.
guard there. Closing thought, I guess, would be use your skills as a cop to know the people that you can trust. That being said, I know the saying goes around in law enforcement circles, treat everybody well until they give you a reason not to. And on the same token, build the relationships. They're important in business. Treat people with respect, but in business, don't necessarily turn your back on them either. So, everybody's out to make a buck. And I made some mistakes of completely trusting somebody who I thought, legitimate business owners or partners, and realize, at the end of the day, they want to make some money too. So protect yourself with intellectual property or, any of that kind of stuff. Have a contract. Don't necessarily, as cops, we know that we have each other's back. If I shake your hand, you're going to have my back. That's may not be the case in all business applications. So just kind of build those relationships, but realize you got to keep an eye on it too. You can find me really FHF at FHF Gear on Instagram. That is our business page. I'm FHF Gear _Paul, real imaginative. And then that's really where I spend most of my time. I have LinkedIn account, which is how you and I connected, but it's rare that I even open it or check it until I start looking for another job. But yeah, FHFgear.com is where everything's on there. And awesome. And anybody in law enforcement can get a discount as well through the website. We do a law enforcement military discount at checkout.
Cool. All right. Well, Paul, thanks for being on the show. Appreciate it, man. It was good meeting and connecting with you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for sticking around till the end of the show. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review at leo2ceo.com/podcast-review or in your preferred podcast listening app. I would love to hear your feedback, and it will also help other COPreneurs like yourself find the show. Be sure to check out the show notes for this episode. Just go to leo2ceo.com, click on podcast, and search this episode number, and you'll find all the links, descriptions, and resources we talked about. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe so you'll be notified when the next episode is live. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys on the next episode.